Hey everyone, I'm crashing into the Waterstones vlog schedule with obviously a very special book, a very special day, a book that a lot of people have been waiting for a very long time. It is, later on today, the midnight opening of shops all over the country to see the arrival of The Testament by Margaret Atwood, the long-awaited sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. And here it is. Yes, here is a copy which I managed to get to read over this weekend, and I'm here with a spoiler-free review. Now, what do I mean by spoiler-free? I don't want to sort of upset anybody or ruin anything for anybody with this book, so I will not be discussing anything to do with the plot. I will not even be talking about who it's narrated by. I will be avoiding all of that, I hope, because I don't want to ruin the reading experience for anybody. There are, of course, reviews out there, there's bits of information out there, but I'm going to try and keep this as sort of vague and thematic as possible and not ruin your reading experience. The first thing to say, I suppose, is that it is so good to have Margaret Atwood back at the controls. And what I mean by that is, of course, that a lot of us have been watching the TV series. I actually watched the first season of The Handmaid's Tale. I watched a bit of the second season, and it started to veer off in a direction that made me feel very uncomfortable, and I wasn't enjoying it, and I decided to stop watching it. And that's partly because, of course, it was going beyond the original book, and there was something about the way some of the female characters were being framed that I found very uncomfortable. So I left the TV series. So picking up The Testaments, and what we can say is that Margaret Atwood has said that she wrote this book in response to the many questions that she gets all the time about what happens next in Gilead, and of course how Gilead falls. And that is, I suppose, what this book does deal with. We do know, I think this is common knowledge, that it is set about 15 years after the end of The Handmaid's Tale. So that, having her back at the controls, what I mean by that is that from the first page, there is that very familiar sort of tone and handling from Margaret Atwood, which means that I just felt my shoulders relax. I was like, yes, she's telling the story, she's in control of it, and I knew that we were in very good hands. It's sort of remarkable to me that an author like Margaret Atwood, who's been writing for so many years, she'll be 80 later on this year, the clarity with which she writes is really, really impressive. And as I say, right from the very first page, you know where you are and what's going on, and it feels very, very good to be in her hands. What can we say about what's contained within this book? Well, I suppose, as I say, it does answer some of those really fundamental questions. And if you think about when we look at dystopian fiction or speculative fiction or fiction that looks at sort of totalitarian or oppressive regimes, there are some questions that will come up again and again and again, which is, how do these things come to be? How do these states rise? How do these people come to power? And looking around the world today, this is a question that we should all be asking ourselves because of the rise and falls of various political movements. Do these things happen insidiously? Do they happen quickly? Do they happen slowly? What should we be doing as citizens to keep our eyes open to make sure that we don't suddenly find ourselves in Gilead? And I think that's one of the really, really interesting ways to read this book, is that idea of seeing how these things happen and what we need to be on guard against. And of course that leads to another question, which is, what will people do to survive within a sort of oppressive regime like that? And that's a really interesting question. Are you the kind of person that would roll over and do whatever you were asked to do? Are you the kind of person that would resist? Are you the kind of person that would be frozen by inaction? Are you the kind of person that would bend slightly and survive in order to either just keep your head down and make sure that you don't die? Or are you the kind of person that would do that in order to somehow effect change later on? And I think that's a really interesting way of reading the book. And as I say, all of this applies to the world today. And that's one of the most amazing things about this book, and of course The Handmaid's Tale previously, is that whilst it is speculative fiction and whilst it might seem to be beyond the realms of possibility, it really isn't. If you look at some of the things that are happening in America at the moment, if you look at some of the rises of populist regimes around Europe, if you look at just politics in general around the world, it can be very quickly that things can change and people suddenly find themselves living in a very different society to the one that they may have grown up in. And that's sort of equally terrifying and stimulating, I suppose, as you're reading. And I suppose at the end of all of this, what you're left with is this sense, this sort of notion about action. It's about being aware, being alert, and never believing that the situation that you're in is beyond repair, that there is always something that can be done to change things for the better. And so in a way, it's about activism, it's about action, it's about camaraderie, it's about working together with other people. And that means that there is this kind of optimistic tone in this book. There is something in there about believing that, I suppose, resistance, if you're in that situation, or working together with others, finding common goals with others, and being able to do something about even the most hopeless situations is possible. And I suppose that's something that I find myself reading about in historical books, looking at the past, so that no matter how awful a situation was, there was always somebody or a group of people who believed that they could make a difference. And so it's quite interesting to see that same theme being put into the sort of the future, if you like. And it's something for us all to bear in mind, wherever we are, whatever happens to be going on in our own domestic politics, or indeed politics internationally, that it is always ordinary people who can make the biggest difference and change even the most sort of hard set and oppressive regimes in history. They have all toppled, and it has all been because of people. Not sort of anything more extraordinary than that, just ordinary people doing something. So that is quite a nice thing to take away from this book. I think it's going to be a hugely popular read. I hope I haven't spoiled anything by talking to you about it rather generally. As I say, midnight tonight, some Waterstones shops will be opening to put the book on sale, but from tomorrow, the 10th of September, it will be available for everybody to read, and it's an absolute treat. So there we go. That is The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. I hope you enjoy it, and I will be back on the normal vlog schedule sometime soon, but until then, take care.